Hi, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Notes series for Out of the Abyss, the D&D 5th edition adventure that's set in the Underdark and full of madness and demon overlords and that sort of thing. So, when we last finished, our characters had just ventured into the Underdark after escaping the Drow outpost of Velkenvelv, and we're kind of learning the ecology and how things work, and um, learning how to camp and forage and all that. Spent a lot of time last session on just introducing them to travel times in the Underdark and the ecology and kind of getting to know the NPCs better. And then they ended on a confrontation, if you will, with some giant fire beetles, which wasn't much of a challenge, but it was a nice way to end the night. So this week, they're continuing towards Gracklestug, being led by Bupido, who is a Darrow who's also crazy and thinks he's the avatar of some deity of vengeance or something like that, which comes into play on this session quite a bit. My goals going into the session were to advance them towards Gracklestug, very possibly get them to Gracklestug by the end of the session. We didn't do that last night, but I'll definitely get them there next session. And then also I wanted to introduce Bupido. He's already been introduced, but introduce the concept, the subplot that he's going to try to kill people ritualistically as part of his madness. So, and then also I ended up working in Topsy and Turvy's lycanthropy. So, and then I worked in one of the. I knew I did not want to have a creature encounter, like a random encounter. I wanted to have there's two types in chapter 2. There's two types of encounters. Well, actually, there's three. There's terrain encounters, which is this sort of random thing where they can run into rope or bridges or cliffs or dangerous natural formations, things of that nature. Then there's creature, your standard random encounters with creatures, and then there's like 4 set encounters that you can just decide to have them go through that are almost like little one night session type parts of the adventure. So what I definitely knew I wanted to advance them towards Gracklestug. I wanted to have one of those terrain encounters. And that was my main goals, and then also introduce the subplot with Bupido. So we hit all those notes last night. Travel-wise, they only made it one day once everything was said and done. So next session, I'm going to have to do some of that summarized travel, because it's they're not even halfway to Gracklestug yet, and I really want to get them there by the end of next session. I'm having fun. And I think they are too with the Underdark, just kind of traveling through the Underdark, but I don't want to draw that out too much. One, because that will get old. And then two, because, this is a very long adventure. So I don't, even if the way the book's written, you can cut it at half when they hit 7th level and take them out of the Underdark and then narratively bring them back in a few months later. It's still going to take quite a while to get there. We play once a week, for a couple hours a night at a local game store. So, I want to go ahead and get them to Gracklestug. And the reason they're going to Gracklestug is because, Bupido was like, hey, we can get better equipment there. So they want equipment, even though they don't have any money. That's where they're headed. So it would have been kind of interesting if they would have gone to, I think it's Sloopadoop. That's the Kuatoa town, lake town, and that's where, there's this dramatic encounter with Demogorgon rising up and all this stuff, and I'll get them there eventually. And Stool, of course, keeps saying, "Hey, let's go to Neverlight Grove." So, I'm assuming they're going to go to Gracklestug, then Neverlight Grove, then Sloopadoop. But we'll see how they go, because I'm trying not to put them completely on rails. Trying to give them information and then let them, kind of make their own choices. About 75% of it. Some stuff there's some notes I definitely want to hit. So I spent some time at the beginning of the session, and once again I did this new thing I've introduced where I have everybody roll a d20, and whoever rolls the lowest gets to summarize what happened before. That's a good way to get them paying more attention and more involved and being able to explain what's going on with the story, and that seemed to go over well. So we did that. I basically had them um, say, okay, you finished your day of travel, and you're beginning a long rest, and at the beginning of all that, I said, okay, you've traveled some more in the Underdark. Caveman idea, you no longer feel cold, wet, and hungry and all that. You're still freaked out, but you're getting a little bit more used to the Underdark. You're getting the point that, hey, there's food down here and water if you forage. Um, so it's kind of giving the idea they're getting a little bit more used to how things work, and the NPCs they're with are kind of introducing them more to the Underdark. We talked about spell components, and said, hey guys, go through your notes, and if it's something that's like a moss or a glowworm or twigs or sand or something like. In fact, they asked about sand for the sleep spell, so we could probably find that stuff down here. You can assume that you're crafting in your downtime and making your spell components. I said if it's something like um, a pearl or a diamond or gold dust or holy water, you're not going to have that yet. There's no way to just spontaneously craft that stuff. So between that and also, they found out some of their spells don't require material components, so they're kind of readjusting their learned spells to compensate for that. So they're a little bit better off in the spell area now, that a few sessions have gone by. But I'm still trying to kind of reinforce that they don't have everything at hand that they would normally need. Also, I would spend some more time describing the geography, what it feels like in the Underdark. Showed them a few more pictures, because there's stuff in the Underdark that's actually quite pretty. See if I can find some examples. I don't know how well it'll come over in black and white, but I showed them some more pictures of like this, and there's some more pictures saying there's some areas where it's very dark and dreary and just plain stone. I said, but there's other areas that it's almost quite beautiful. There's glowing things, there's mushroom groves, and there's crystals, and you see critters, and I just kind of give them a better idea of the ecology. And I explained sometimes you're single file, sometimes you're two abreast, sometimes you're in big caverns. So trying to give them the idea of that. And then I also said you're getting more used to the plant, the funguses, and things like that. That's pretty well laid out in chapter 2. I like this part of chapter 2. And I said okay, and I gave him, said the NPCs are kind of teaching you stuff, and I told him about ripplebark and fire lichen and blue cap and barrel stalk, and then I told him about tongue of madness, which is this fungus, edible fungus that looks somewhat like a large human tongue. And if you eat it, you have to, and you fail a saving throw, you compulsively speak aloud your every thought for the next hour. I just threw that in there for interesting, whatever. But one of the characters was like, ooh, can I get some of that? So I had them roll, and yeah, you found some, because specifically later in the adventure, like, can I find some of that? And I let them roll, and they found some on a nature check, I think. Anyway, and it came into play later in the adventure. So you never know what your characters are going to do. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But anyway, so I spent some time on that, and then we had I said, okay, you guys are doing your long rests, and you're falling into your normal routines of foraging and trying to get your camp together and that sort of thing. And I said, once everybody gets back and you're all ready to go, you notice somebody's missing. And it was Prince Darendel, who's the Quaggoth that thinks that it's a elven prince that has been polymorphed into a Quaggoth. It's not, it's just a regular Quaggoth, but the madness of the Underdark has infected it. So they're like, oh. So they went searching, and I knew I was going to let them find him, but I had, the one group went out, tried to find him, couldn't. And then another group went out and, through rolling, I think I set the DC at 15, they found him. And I said, it's a few minutes away, and you find this kind of crevasse, I guess, sort of almost like a little alley off of the main, cavern that you're going through, and it's a dead end, and it's easy to miss, but if you're looking for it, you can find it. And so they went in there, and of course there's Darendelle laid out flat, dead, cut open with his organs removed and kind of arranged, which is what Bupido does, the crazy Darrow, who's leading them to Gracklestug. But he thinks he's the avatar of some deity of vengeance, and this is all in his mind, how things are supposed to be. So they're like, oh, and a cleric was with them, just happened to be with them. So I said, well, due to your, like kind of theology training and just exposure, it's obvious there's something kind of ritualistic going in here. You don't know what, but it looks like this is kind of a ritualistic thing. They're like, ah. So they were like, ah, and they ran back to the group and said, we found him, and here's the deal. And then people started asking questions like, well, how did he die, and was there bloody footprints? And then they were like, oh, we don't know. So a few people went back and did some investigating on the body, and they found out that he had been clubbed in the back of the head with something, kind of caved in the back of his head, and that killed him, which, sort of implies that he was caught off guard, because, quaggas are pretty nasty. What they don't know yet is that, Bupido did it, and he was like, oh, look down here, look at this, and Prince Darendelle, did that to look at something, and Bupido clobbed him one. So, which hit points wise, wouldn't work, but for the story it worked. So, and then he did his little ritual thing. So they found that that was how he died, and that the amount of blood was as if it had happened right here, once he was cut open right there. And then also they couldn't get any more information about footprints or anything like that, but that it was obvious that somebody had kind of tried to clean up after themselves, not to leave footprints leading out and stuff like that. So that's everything they knew. And they're like, oh, it's pretty crazy out here. And at first, I think before they found the body, I had one of the NPCs go, I hope that the drow haven't caught up with this yet, because they assume rightly that there's a drow hunting party coming after them from Velkenvelv, and there is. There's that whole pursuit mechanic to determine how close they are. That's laid out in Chapter 2, and right now they're kind of close, but not super close. They're about medium close to the party. But anyway, but then after that, they're like, suspicion sort of came. They start suspecting the party. Somebody in the party is dangerous, which is correct, but they don't know that absolutely for sure. So they kind of came back, and the cleric Graham the Mag is the name of the cleric. He just flat out asked everybody, did anybody see Prince Darendelle go with somebody? And it was like, well, I don't know. So that didn't help, but I think he had a high perception or insight. I can't remember. I think we used insight, and the cleric had a high insight, and my blind rogue had a high insight. So they both rolled to see if they could remember anything that might give clues. And what I basically did was said, you don't know who left with who, but you're both pretty sure, because the blind guy can still hear, and he's very perceptive to his surroundings, that Jim Jar, the deep gnome that likes to bet on everything, Topsy and Turvy, the two deep gnomes that are not gnomes, deep gnomes, the Sverv Nephilim, and they're also wererats, twin brother and sister. Shushar, the Awakened, the Kuatoa, and Darendelle all kind of left about the same time, but not necessarily with each other, and Bupido. So I was kind of like, Bupido was in that mix, but they don't know really, it wasn't like that Bupido and Darendelle went traipsing off together. But I'm trying to give them a few more clues, So at this point, because Topsy and Turvy, as the game suggests, the book suggests, are withdrawn, kind of nervous, kind of anxious, and I said, they've been getting more and more anxious the further you go. Well, the reason is they're wererats, and they're wanting to take off before before the full moon turns them, and they don't want anybody to know their secret. But of course, suspicion is falling on them, right? Everyone's kind of suspecting them. Well, on the watches that night, I had Bupido approach the cleric and say I didn't want to say anything out loud because, I didn't want danger on me. But I'm pretty sure that Topsy and Turvy went with Prince Darendale. So, of course, he's trying to shift suspicion. And I had played him earlier, they were like, hey, come with us, they wanted a few different NPCs to go with them to check out the body. And he was like, well, heavens, I don't know what help I'll be, but if you want me to go, I'll go. And, when he got there, he was like, oh, I can't handle this. So, because they say to playing very amiable, very affable, very pleasant. So, kind of the last person you would suspect. Anyway, so they shared, the cleric kind of shared that with the party that, everybody except Topsy and Turvy, he kind of shared that out. So we need to keep a closer eye on them. And then my tiefling monk, I heard him kind of say, so my two main suspects are Bupido and Topsy and Turvy, or three main suspects. So, he got the point that, oh, this guy's trying to cast, could possibly be trying to shift blame. So anyway, so the next day, they're doing their traveling, and they had foraged enough. What I'm letting them do is if they roll well enough on foraging, then they can collect enough food that they can fast travel the next day and not have to worry about foraging during that day. And they had done that, so they were fast traveling. But I rolled a terrain encounter, and out of all the possibilities, there's like a boneyard, and there's all these crazy things they can run into. Let's see if I can find it. Let's see. There's they can run into a rope bridge, some ruins, a rock fall, horrid sounds, a steam vent, underground stream, fungus cavern, etc., etc. There's 20 different things. Well, they ran into a gas leak, which is a cavern full of natural gas. And if people's passive perception is high enough, they can detect it. Well, they did. There was more than one party member that could detect, say, hey, something's not right in here. So they backed out, and they realized it was natural gas. And so this is just on their own. They said, well, hey, let's make it look like that we camped in there, so that way if the drow are pursuing us, maybe they'll go in there. So I was like, okay. So they, used deception, and 3 or 4, not everybody, but a few characters said, I'll go in. I said, I want to know exactly who's going in. They told me, and they went in, and I gave them a deception check, and they rolled pretty well. But anyway, they set it up in there to kind of make it look like, they specifically went in there and kind of camped in there. And I had everybody that was in there do there's a difficulty check, Constitution, I think it's a 12 or a 13. And if you fail it, you take up to 10 points poison damage. And everybody passed but one. The paladin failed and took like 8 points of poison damage or something like that. So that was just because they were in there so long. And then they came back out. Now, what I did was, if you run into a natural encounter, per the game rules, that slows your travel time as far as the pursuit rules go. So they went from fast to normal just because they ran into the natural encounter. But because they said, hey, we want to stop and set up this deception, I had them to a slow day. So that was a slow day of travel, which bumped up the pursuit level by 1. So I think they went from a 3 to a 4, and if they get to a 6, the drow catch up with them. So, and they also got a slow day of travel. So, and then they came back to the camp. We're doing all their thing, and I had Topsy and Turvy. This was kind of I kind of spontaneously did this. I think on one hand it worked well. On the other hand, I'm not so sure. But Topsy and Turvy you know, they need to go sooner or later because they're wererats. And I knew that I wanted to get everybody to Gracklestug by the end of next session. And I definitely want Topsy and Turvy to be gone. One, for story reasons, but two, because the less NPCs, the easier this thing is to manage. And next session on the way to Gracklestug, I wanna resolve the Bupido plot, and have it come out that it's him and all of that. So what I did was, I decided to do it narratively instead of trying to make it a combat or something like that. Although it being D&D and players being players, it ended up in combat, of course. But there's Topsy and Turvy. Topsy's the sister, Turvy's the brother. She's more talkative. He's very surly and withdrawn. But she basically, while they were eating, said, we need to leave. In the morning, we're leaving. So we appreciate the company and the safety in numbers, but for the best interest of everybody, we need to leave. So people were asking, why, and they're like, we really don't want to talk about it, but we need to leave. Now, Topsy and Turvy's goals here are, A, they don't want anybody to know the wererats, but two, they don't want to hurt the party. They just want to go. So the monk who had gotten the tongue of madness, the fungus that if you eat it and fail your saving throw, you'll just spontaneously say anything that comes into your mind for an hour. He used sleight of hand to slip some of that into their food while they were eating, and he rolled a natural 20, so no problem. So he's like, yes. Well, Topsy and Turvy both made their saving throws, so it didn't affect them. Now, narratively, I could have, in retrospect, I'm wondering if I shouldn't have gone ahead and had that take effect, and then they would come out that, well, we're wererats and we've got to go so we don't kill you and all that. But I went ahead and went by the rolls that it didn't affect them. Of course, people kept asking questions and people were using insight and all this stuff, and it's like, it just seems like they want to leave, So anyway, so during the watches, I had determined that they're going to start transforming into wererats. Now, I chose I don't know why in my head I got it third watch. I just chose that. There's usually 4 watches. Well, I said, who's on third watch? And it was the monk and the paladin, the half-orc paladin and the tiefling monk ended up on the third watch. Knowing my players, I probably should have chose a different watch because William, the half-orc paladin, has a tendency to provoke situations. So, but for whatever reason in my mind, I said it was third watch. So as they're on watch, all of a sudden Topsy-Turvy start kind of their bad dreams or something funny is going on, and the paladin goes over and kind of pokes at Topsy, and she wakes up. She's kind of kind of unseeing, and then she kind of focuses in on him. She's like, we waited too long. We must go. And it's obvious that Turvy, the brother, is changing into something. So, the paladin's like, and the half-orc, or not the tiefling monk, the character is like, what's going on? I need information. Tell me what's happening right now. Which I kind of like that because Minnie was freaked out. I like that Minnie was into the scene. But anyway, I had Topsy, we have to go, and she's standing up and staggering around, and she's dragging Turvy through to the outside the cave that they're camping in to go, and I was just trying to make this a narrative scene. Like, they've got to go. It's obvious something bad's happening, and they're trying to get away from you. Well, the paladin, being not only the character he's playing, but the person he is, said, well, I'm staying with him. And he stays right with them, down the hallway, or down the little path they're going down. Everybody's waking up. What's going on? People are saying, hey, this is, something crazy is going on here. So everybody's waking up. The cleric kind of stumbles out after them, and everybody else is still in the cave. So I had, the paladin said specifically he was staying right on them, and I had the sister turn around and say, leave us alone. We're trying to leave, but he stayed on them. And sure enough, they transformed into wererats right in front of him. So his paladin nature kicks in, and he's like, evil must die. So he starts yelling wererats and goes into combat with the wererats. So, long story short, the wererats were very hard to kill because they're immune to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing, and you have to have like a magical or a silver weapon of that type if you want to hurt them. Of course, they can take damage from magic and that sort of thing. It turned into a very long combat, and you had people running out there. Some people just being meat shields to take damage from the wererats, while there was really the cleric could hurt them with I think is it Sacred Flame, Searing Flame. It was a cantrip he kept throwing. The paladin could hurt them because he had a spell he threw on his sword that gave it radiant damage, and then the bard could do vicious mockery and do psychic damage. Well, this took quite a while, and it was a pretty tough fight, and there was a lot of healing having to happen, especially on the monk was just getting pummeled on. As a long story short, they finally killed the wererats, which they seemed to enjoy the fight, and during the fight, the monk and the paladin both got bit. So now they're like, oh, are we gonna turn into wererats? I don't know what I'm gonna do with that yet. I read, the monster manual write-up on lycanthropy in the lycanthrope section, and it said that, if you could contract lycanthropy if you're bit or whatever, but it didn't say you definitely do. So I don't know what I'm going to do with that yet. I may work it in as an interesting plot thing, and I may not. But anyway, so they killed him, which I was kind of hoping narratively it would be interesting, but they went ahead, as players do, they went into combat, and at one point we had the monk trying to grapple because he couldn't hurt the wererat, so he was grappling one to try to kind of lock it down. So there was some grappling going on, and because he was grappling, he was taking damage from the cleric's radiant damage cantrip. Well, I can't remember what the name of that is. I should know better. It's like Searing Flame or Sacred Flame or something like that. And the bard, I have to give the bard credit. Tom, the guy that plays the bard, he's got all these index cards with insults. So when he's doing vicious mockery, he chooses one and reads it out. So he's doing psychic damage. Well, long story short, they managed to beat the wererats. But it was a pretty good fight. Now, and that's where I pretty much ended things. I said, okay, you're going to go back and do a long rest. You're going to, do your long rest after that. So that's where we ended things. Now, one of my characters, 13-year-old, his character, once he understood that, oh, well, none of my weapons can hurt, he just kind of decided not to be involved, and he literally said, I'm going back to my bedroll and going to sleep. But in game terms, it turned out that he was just kind of keeping an eye on Stool and some of the other NPCs while all this other stuff was going on. But, if that's how he wants to play his characters, neutral good, that's his choice, but I'm going to let there be consequences to that. The Dwarven NPC, Eldith, who's very self-sacrificing, and she ran out there just to be a meat shield, she's developing an attitude with him. So that's gonna come into the next session, where she's gonna be very put out with him for thinking just of himself and not of the party. And if he's like, well, I was just, keep an eye, she's like, I'm not gonna have that, because that's honestly not what he was doing. He was just, and then I can do. So now the blind rogue kind of hung out at the entrance to the cave they were camping in and listened, and he was shouting advice to the party, because he's got knives. There's already people surrounding the wererat, so he can't even really get in there. He can't throw a knife or anything like that. So, but he was trying to keep an eye on things and kind of shout advice and encouragement, in the form of cut off its tail and slap it with its own tail, because that will intimidate it. But he was at least trying to be involved. So, like I said, next session I'm going to have Bupitos I'm going to try to wrap up that subplot close to Gracklestug so they can continue to Gracklestug on their own. And they still have the Drow with them, Shinzan, I think his name is. Um, and he will, because he can guide pretty much anywhere in the Underdark. So if Bupito's removed the situation, he can still get them there. But I think I'm going to have Bupito go after the blind rogue because he's going to assume that that's an easy target. The reason he went after Prince Darendel to begin with, to be honest, because I wanted to reduce the NPC count a little bit, and Prince Darendel was just, I mean, he was a good fighter, but he didn't seem, nobody in the group seemed super interesting in him. I wasn't super interested in him, so just went ahead and got rid of him. Especially since, other than the fact that he's crazy, he doesn't really have an interesting subplot or anything like that. So I kind of wish that Topsy and Turvy would have gotten away and maybe they could have come back into the game later. But, you know, you got to give the players agency. That's what they decided to do. So I gave them, and everyone was like, what are you doing? You know, they were even like, leave them alone, let them go. But the Paladin was like, no, they're evil, they must die. So that's how it went. You know, in game terms, they did get 900 XP out of it. So, and they, you know, they had an interesting fight where they realized that, oh, you know, it's not just, we can't just hack and slash our way through this. These creatures are tough. And it was the night that the magic used, the gnome, half-orc necromancer, Melkor, did not show up, that player. So they didn't have any, it would have been a better fight if they had magic missiles and this and that going on. But they didn't. Now, I had told the bard that he's got sleep because he has sand. You know, I don't know why he didn't cast that, but maybe he didn't have it memorized. I don't know. It's up to him. Anyway, so that's how things went. You know, I'm still keeping track that I mentioned last time I have this log that keeps track of how many what day we played, how many days they made it, where their destination is, how close they are. And right now they're only 8 days toward Gracklestug, and they have it's like 28 days, I think. So they, you know, I got to do some summarized travel. There's rules for summarizing days of travel. I'm going to do next time to get them there. In fact, the player who was like, I can't, I'm going to go back into my bedroll. You know, he's like, can we just kind of beat a Gracklestug? So I get the feeling that, you know, he's not really enjoying this part of the game. Although I did check with, every now and then I poll my players, and I checked with everybody, so you guys having fun with this? And everyone's like, yes, this is a lot of fun. So I know that the majority of people are having fun with it. And, you know, I'm assuming that the 13-year-old is getting a little bit bored. He may be having fun. I don't know. He may be asking for game rules. You know, is it possible to just, I don't know. But, you know, it does seem like everybody's having fun with it at this point. So next time, my hope is to resolve the Bupito subplot and get them to Gracklestug. Not into Gracklestug, but there. And then the session after that, we'll do Gracklestug. So that's kind of where I'm at on the game. So again, still enjoying it. Everybody seems to be enjoying it. Good adventure, a lot of fun. Again, I don't think I'd recommend this for a first-time DM. There's a lot to juggle, but that's not to say that you couldn't do it. I'd love to have your tips below, how you're handling things, how you may be. How would you handle the lycanthropy since 2 characters got bit by wererats? You know, how maybe you would do the Bupito thing. You know, how what your characters did in similar situations. Any of that stuff. I'd love to have your comments on the video. Make sure to, if you would, leave it a thumbs up on YouTube. Leave it a comment. That helps me a lot. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. But we will catch you next time on the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss series notes right here on Shane Plays. Thanks so much.